from the studios of WOR in New York City, Mutual Radio presents The Larry King Show. Now, here's Larry.
Thank you very much, Fred Lowry, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another hour of The Larry King Show, coast to coast on Mutual. Normally, we are based in Washington, D.C. All this week, we're in New York City, celebrating WOR, our affiliate in New York's 60th anniversary. We look forward to a great week. I've had a great time already with our own high school reunion Saturday night. I'll be talking about that later. This has been a real nostalgia trip for yours truly. Our new affiliate this week, great to welcome aboard, KORK in Las Vegas, Nevada. Our guests earlier were Rick Devlin, the Vice President and General Manager of WOR, and for the past hour and a half, Carl Bernstein, formerly of the Washington Post and the team of Woodward and Bernstein, now with ABC TV. In a moment, we will meet Bill Owen. Mr. Owen has been a staff announcer for ABC Radio and Television for 21 years. He is a voice. His is a voice you will recognize instantly. You have heard him do station breaks, host a program called Discovery. You've heard him on radio and television. He was the voice of the Easter Seals campaign this year for radio and TV. And he's an expert on the history of this business. And that's what we're talking about all this week. The history of this business. So before we talk with Bill Owen, and by way of introducing him, we're going to present to you a tape garnered from the archives of WOR. They label this one Superheroes.
Tony, come on, boy. Bread, roasting for your breakfast. Starts the day all shining bright. Gives you lots of cowboy energy with a flavor that's just right. It's delicious and nutritious, bite-sized and ready to eat. Take a tip from Tom, go and tell your mom shredded Ralston can't be beat.
The Tom Mix Ralston Straight Shooters bring you action, mystery, and mile-a-minute thrills. Tonight you're about to hear another episode in a baffling mystery. Mystery of the Vanishing Village.
Battling the raging elements, fighting the savage wilderness, striking at the enemies of man and nature. One man's name resounds from snow-capped mountains down across the sun-baked plains. Mark Twain! Guardian of the forest, protector of wildlife, champion of man and nature. Mark Twain!
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up on the...
Oh, jumping Jupiter. Are you really Superman?
That's right. What's your name?
Jerry Farber. Jeepers. Where's Blackie, my pony?
He's all right, too.
As a matter of fact, he's eating the grass in my yard this very minute. And welcome he is to it.
Oh, gee, I'm glad. But I almost forgot. My brother Marty and Miss Lane and everyone in the village. Hey.
Miss Lane? Then she is alive.
Yeah, sure. She's the one who told me what was going to happen.
Now, wait a minute. Slow down, Jerry. Tell me just what happened so I can help.
Oh, gosh, you sure can. Only you can. If it's not too late, I mean. If they didn't find him in the shaft already and...
Easy now. Wait, who are they and what's this about a shaft?
The old mine shaft,
yeah,
where everyone left in the village is hiding. You see, when Miss Lane told me the convicts were going to put everyone on a raft and send them over Mammoth Falls...
The convicts? Wait, this is incredible.
Just a moment, please, Doctor. I'm beginning to get the drift of this. Go on, Jerry.
Okay. The convicts came to our village with Miss Lane.
Yes?
Now they want to get rid of everyone left in the village. So when the floodwaters go down, nobody will be able to tell the police that First Page Harry and the others are still alive.
I see. Where is this village? What's the name of it?
Hilltop. Oh, gosh, Superman, if you can only get there...
Up and away! Uh-oh, far ahead in the river. Those broken pilings at the head of the falls. Great Scott, it's a raft full of people. Wedged in the pilings. It's working loose now. Starting over the falls. Got to grab that raft before it goes over. Hurry! Down from the skies like some gigantic eagle. Superman seizes the huge raft crowded with shouting, milling people, just as it is starting over the roaring 300-foot waterfall of positive destruction in the great black rocks below. Grasping it in his powerful hand, he gets set for a leap. Then, up, and away! The man of steel rockets up from the wild, tumbling water and sets the raft and its precious human cargo on the dark shore high above Mammoth Falls. Superman begins began his search for the Red Cross motor cutter in Lois Lane, the cutter itself, powerful diesel motor throbbing, has fought through the floodwaters and is approaching the almost inundated levees of a large river city whose lights gleam through the dark night. Behind the two crewmen in the bow of the cutter stands one of the convicts, a submachine gun cradled in his arm. Another armed convict guards Lois Lane and the third crewman in the stern. In the center of the boat, the blonde, wiry, first-page Harry Doak, leader of the convicts, issues tense orders.
All right, now get this, you guys. The pilot here says this town has to open the upstream floodgate to let us in. Now, they won't want to on account of the floodwaters. So I'll tell them to drop us the ladder on the levee and pull us out. You get me? As soon as we get the ladder, you give it to these crew guys with the butts of your guns, see?
Yeah.
Then dump them overboard without making a lot of noise.
Sure. How about Miss Lane?
I'll take care of her myself.
Another moment and the desperate convicts will strike. With Superman far away, can anything save Lois and the Red Cross men now? Don't miss tomorrow's exciting episode, fellows and girls. Tune in, same time, same station, and thrill to The Adventures of Superman. Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman.
Same time, same station. We'll be back and talk with Bill Owen, staff announcer at ABC, in a voice you will recognize immediately, and we're going to reminisce following these messages.
There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do.
The old woman who lived in a shoe, unfortunately, isn't unique. Thousands of parents in America are so confused or frustrated, they don't know what to do, so they take it out on their children.
Every year, millions of American children suffer physical, emotional, or sexual abuse or neglect at the hands of their own parents. You can do something to help change that. You can help stop child abuse. This is Roy Rogers
and Dale Evans reminding you that child abuse can be prevented. Write Prevent Child Abuse, Box 2866, Chicago, Illinois, 60690.
That's Prevent Child Abuse, Box 2866, Chicago. Remember, abused children are helpless unless you help. A public service message of this station, the Advertising Council, and the National Committee for Prevention of Child Abuse.
Let's talk about pain. We're all in pain at one time or another, but for most of us, once the cause is corrected, the pain goes away. Chronic pain lingers long after the original cause is gone, imprisoning the sufferer in a lonely world of restless days, sleepless nights, depression, immobility, and isolation from family and friends. The Pain Management Center at Centinela Hospital Medical Center was created to break the walls of this pain prison. At the center, a team of physicians, psychologists, nurses, and specialized therapists all focus their skills on the patient. Using the latest medical techniques, they help patients break the vicious cycle of pain, regain control over their lives. If you or a loved one suffer from chronic pain, help is available. It's at the Pain Management Center of Centinela Hospital Medical Center. For more information, call 213-673-6330. That's 213-673-6330. They could help you really live again.
KMPC. It's the Larry King Show, live from the studios of WOR in New York City.
And we welcome to our microphones Bill Owen of ABC. He's been staff announcer at ABC for 21 years. How'd you get into this? Were you the kind of kid who had the voice and everyone said you ought to be in radio?
Yeah, they tell me that when I was a little boy, I grew up in a little town up near the Canadian border in North Dakota that I used to play out in the sandbox. And they do have summer out there. I played out there in the summertime and was always broadcasting either a ball game or a newscast or the Hindenburg disaster or whatever was in my mind. And I guess I gave early on signs that was to be my profession.
What what were you doing prior to joining ABC?
After going to school at USC in Los Angeles, I headed for service, spent a couple of years in the Air Force, and managed to hook up with American Forces Network in Frankfurt, Germany. So I was there for a year doing ball games, boxing matches, and so on, and kind of getting accustomed to the business, and came back and gave commercial radio a whirl in my hometown in North Dakota, and then worked my way up to most people at that stage of the announcing business usually stop in about 26 jerkwater towns before they hit a big one, but my next stop was Cincinnati, and the next one was New York, so I didn't waste time. I was so lucky in both cases.
Were you working at a local station in New York?
I came right to ABC television. The timing was just right. This is the secret of the whole business. As most of us know, you're in the right place at the right time. They were looking for somebody. They had just added an FM operation. And the reason I got my job in Cincinnati was the same thing. I started out as a summer relief announcer, and one of the men was fired for passing bad checks who could have hung on for 40 years. I wouldn't have had an opening to go to. So I had a series of breaks, and first thing you know, here I am in New York.
You worked for Tom O'Brien at ABC?
Yeah, I did newscasts for Tom for 4 or 5 years. He's one of the great names of radio, and he always could relate to somebody like me because he was one of NBC's prime announcers for many, many years. He's got a lot of great stories to tell. Well, the one we have to get to is about the chimes over at NBC.
Go ahead, tell it.
All right. The NBC chimes, most of us remember, even the younger ones will remember the boom, 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 which was GEC, the piano notes, GEC for General Electric Corporation. And they had originally a hookup between WEAF New York, the NBC outlet, and WGY in Schenectady. And that was the system Q. And it was quite a trademark, an audio logo, so to speak. Well, this went through a whole metamorphosis. Originally, they actually had to sound the notes. And then I guess they decided that some of the announcers weren't that musical, so they put them in order. And that confused the announcers who were used to pressing them in the GEC order and so on. Eventually, they reached the point, I understand, where they simply pressed a button. Now, everything that's mechanical has its bad days, as we all know. Yeah. And Tom was on duty, as he tells the story one day, and the chimes didn't operate. So what did fast-thinking Tom do? Boom, 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 with his voice. Why not?
Why did you switch from news and things you've done in the past, sports, to be, quote, a term we rarely hear anymore, staff announcer?
Yeah, that is a vanishing breed. Staff announcers were the great heroes of their day before I became one. And
that's right, we wanted to be staff announcer.
Yeah, and now it carries a different connotation. Now most people think of a staff announcer as the old style elocution type person who's very, shall we say, square and not really hep. And we have only 11 left of our, I think we had as many as 34 staff announcers at ABC at one time.
Why did you become a staff announcer?
That was the only way that I could see getting into the networks. That was the stepping stone.
But then you did news.
Well, that was, I was loaned out while I was at ABC, so that was no great mystery. And then I was also loaned out to do the Discovery series, which meant I traveled around the world, which was nice duty for 5 years.
What does a staff announcer do?
Well, nowadays it just depends. It's possible to be a staff announcer and sit in a booth and say Channel 7 New York or give your local call letters of the local station or a system queue on the network. And for some people, that's what happens. For those who are more enterprising and luckier, they can go out and find other assignments. So I find myself doing assignments in sports, occasionally an on-camera piece. I'll be doing things for the news department, both radio and television commercials.
All night, when ABC go after Nightline, they go to a movie or something.
Yeah, that's
the
my
voice
stick there, right. I come on. Fortunately, I record that during the day. These are unusual hours for me now. But we'll do what we call late night announcements in the morning, and I have to say, this is ABC Late Night. We time this all to the music. This is one of those things that the audience, of course, takes for granted. They hear a voice. It doesn't mean anything. They go into the promo and so on. But when we produce these openings to the movie, the Monday movie of the week, everything is timed out, and we do, on an average, 10 or 15 takes to get one 30-second announcement because it has to be perfect.
Do you get bored?
Never. No, I've never been bored in this business, I will say. You know, you had the superheroes on before. It slips my mind a minute ago, and we heard Jackson Beck. I remarked, off mic here that Jackson Beck was the narrator for Superman. Bud Collyer played the title role. Jackson Beck was playing a villain in that particular little piece. And that was quite common. Sometimes people on some of these shows like Tom Mix, The Lone Ranger, and so on would play not dual roles, but septuple roles, 6 and 7 parts.
How did you become a radio buff? I mean, lots of us work in radio, but you work in it and also became a buff.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
It all began when I was the announcer on Discovery before I was the host, and a chap named Frank Buxton was the star of the show at that time. And we were taping day after day, and in any television situation, big time or small time, there are always long, long breaks in which you shoot the breeze. And we were probing with one another's knowledge, and we'd say, do you remember such and such a movie star? Do you remember Francis Farmer? Do you remember The Lone Ranger, and this and that? One day we got into a great discussion on some radio show, and Frank said one thing, I said another, and we were both sticking to our guns. And I said, Frank, I'm going to look that up. So I went to the New York Public Library, one of the great libraries of the world. Went down and
block
said,
from here.
Right, where's your radio section? They said, we don't have any radio books. You know, they have how to build sets and things like that. Maybe something about the industry, but there was nothing. There was no place where I could look up who played what. That's what I wanted. Who played what, basically? Who was the announcer? Who was the star? So you can just figure at that point what happened, Frank. And I said, well, why not us? We started out, we were going to have a 64-page pamphlet.
You wrote a book, right?
And we wound up with this thing called the BigBroadcast, which is several hundred pages, and it's still growing. I'm still gathering material for possibly an updated version.
That book lists all the famous shows and who was on them, right?
Yeah, Henry Morgan, who wrote the foreword for us, he summed it up very nicely. He said, whatever was on radio then, it's all here. We have the cast lists, we have the catchphrases, we have the historical dates, the networks, and fortunately this served as a springboard for other authors who came along, and we kind of pioneered the way. And there were many other fine books that came out. Mary Jane Higby had one on the soap operas called Tune In Tomorrow, and then a fellow in Denver named John Dunning came out with one called Tune In Yesterday, which was a narrative view of old radio.
What, in your opinion, Bill, makes it so fascinating for us? And I say those of us in our 40s who kind of lived through it, and even today here at WOR, when I was here this morning, watching the younger people who work here, fascinated by hearing an Oldsmobile commercial or The Shadow. What is that fascination that we don't seem to have yet for early television?
It really boils down, Larry, to one word: imagination. We were able to have an unfettered view of the world through our mind's eye. When we pictured somebody in suspense, or a villain in The Lone Ranger, or the guy that was giving Little Orphan Annie trouble and so on, we could picture what we wanted. And there's no way that the celluloid or the video tube can possibly picture somebody that frightening, that beautiful, that interesting, that large. It was all there, especially the science fiction type programs. The classic, of course, is Orson Welles' War of the Worlds.
The scripts were not particularly, Rod Serling told me once, they weren't any better than what you see on television now.
That's very true. I agree with that assessment.
I mean, that Superman thing we just heard was mundane. It was trite.
Sometimes
it was cliche-ish.
Sometimes these scripts were being written as the show went on the air. Actors did not always have their dialogue. I'm not exaggerating, especially in some of the soap operas. So we're sometimes disappointed when we go back and listen to all this. We're always amused, and we find it fascinating, but it was not greatness. It was not great literature.
We didn't know it wasn't great when we were listening to it then.
That's exactly it. That's exactly the point. And, you know, we always think that the good old days are better than they really were. But the one thing that I wish I could will to my offspring would be the thrill of coming home from school at 5:15 or so and tuning on whatever your favorite show was. Nothing has ever captured that on television.
I always remember Captain Midnight.
Oh, well, that was one of the Mutual programs. That's, to me, the word mutual is a glamorous word, because most of my favorite shows, the children's shows, came from Mutual.
Mutual, as Mr. Devlin explained earlier, WOR, WXYZ, WGN formed Mutual as kind of a, how do we counteract the big networks?
That's true.
Can we form a sort of like a 7-Eleven fighting A&P?
Yeah.
But they came up with great counter programs.
They were different. I don't know if Rick mentioned that the one striking difference between Mutual and the other networks is they never owned and operated any stations. They were a service, a hookup, whereas the others had flagship stations.
But they came up with The Shadow. And they came up with programs.
Little Orphan Annie. I think they originated the soap operas like Ma Perkins, which later went to the other networks. But Mutual was very glamorous. There's so many memories that I have listening to Mutual, and of course it became the largest network in the world. I think it was finally surpassed in the 50s by a Johnny-come-lately called Liberty Broadcasting, which was based on baseball, believe it or not.
Was these shows we reminisce, was The Shadow an enormous hit?
Oh, yeah, of course. This was one of the great programs. This show is
But it was always an offbeat. It was always 5 o'clock Sunday night, 6 o'clock. It was never what you'd call prime time.
It moved around. I remember it being Saturday afternoon, but it was in various time slots. It went through all types of program formats. And in the early days, the Shadow was not Lamont Cranston. The Shadow was simply the narrator. And he simply told various stories. And then that's when Orson Welles was doing it.
Orson Welles did The Shadow?
Yeah, but in the early days, you wouldn't recognize it if you heard one of those recordings now. It was so different. Then somebody got the idea of the disembodied voice and Lamont Cranston.
Another thing I remember, The Shadow wasn't invisible, but he had the power to cloud men's minds.
Well said.
To make it appear he wasn't.
Of course. And as bad as some of those scripts are, they were not works of literature either. You still get the feeling of eeriness, and you have to feel for the poor guy that even if he's a villain who the Shadow is trailing and suddenly announces, and he'll say, "Where are you? I can't see you. I hear the voice." And he'd go into this whole routine.
We'll talk about some of the product developments of these shows, too. The Captain Midnight Dakota rings and the like. Our guest is Bill Owen, staff announcer at ABC. You hear his voice frequently throughout the day, radio and television. We're going to reminisce for another half hour, and later on through the night, we're going to play some other wonderful tapes for you. Pearl Harbor Day, the interruption. You're going to hear the actual football broadcast, and the break-in into that. You're going to hear a history of this station that we're broadcasting from tonight, WOR, from the first day they went on the air when Al Jolson entertained 60 years ago today, or now yesterday, depending on your time zone, February 22nd, 1922. Our guest is Bill Owen. Tomorrow night, Kenny Delmar. I can ask Bill Owen about Kenny Delmar. Will be with us, and Sonny Werblin, the president of Madison Square Garden, two guys who go back a bit. This is the Larry King Show in New York City. We'll be back following the news headlines on the Mutual Broadcasting System, your network for news and sports.
This is Mary Tyler Moore speaking for the March of Dimes. If a young child were spending some time with you, would you let that child smoke? Or would you offer that child a drink, say a martini or some scotch? Everybody knows that smoking isn't good for anyone. As to giving children alcohol, well, nobody in their right mind would do that to a young child. Don't be too sure. An alarming number of young women are doing just that. They're pregnant and they smoke and or drink during their pregnancy. Both can hurt them and can hurt their unborn children. Children who are spending the most critical time of their lives with them. Notice that I say can hurt the unborn child, because doctors don't know how much is too much or how little is dangerous. So to be on the safe side, if you're pregnant, think of your unborn baby before you smoke or drink. That's the good prenatal care health tip from the March of Dimes.
After testifying for nearly 2 hours on Monday, Wayne Williams is due back on the witness stand on Tuesday. In Williams' first day of testimony, he denied he killed 2 blacks or that he is a homosexual. The government has banned further installation of a popular foam insulation. The insulation is already used in 500,000 American homes, but the government says urea formaldehyde insulation poses the risk of cancer and other dangers to health. The ban caps an investigation by the Consumer Product Safety Commission that began in the 1970s. 5 U.S. Defense and State Department officials have left Bangkok for Hanoi. The purpose of their trip, talks about returning the remains of American servicemen missing in action during the Vietnam War. Richard Armitage leads the 5-member delegation. He is Deputy Defense Secretary and the highest-ranking Pentagon official to visit Hanoi in connection with the MIA issue. John Henrahan, Mutual News.
I
do my food shopping at Vaughn's. They've got the quality and low prices I want. Like this week, I just needed tomatoes, and I got something extra. Fresh lettuce! $50,000!
That's right. Vaughn's is giving you a chance to win something extra. $2 million in cash and fabulous food prizes, including $50,000, $10,000, $5,000, and $1,000 in cash, plus hundreds of shopping sprees, $5,000 $10 gift certificates, 4,000 hams, 6,000 turkeys, and millions of other instant food prizes. Over 2,700,000 prizes in all.
I came to Vaughn's for dip and ended up in the chips. $10,000!
There's no purchase necessary. You must be 18 or older to play. Something Extra ends May 5th or when all game pieces are distributed. Details and rules at 166 Vaughn stores in California and Nevada. So hurry to Vaughn's for your free game stamp and booklet.
$50,000!
This could be you. So what are you waiting for? Come to Vaughn's because there could be something extra waiting for you.
This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
Give my regards to Broadway. Remember me to Herald Square.
Live from the studios of WOR in New York City, Mutual Radio presents The Larry King Show. Now, here's Larry.
We're spending a delightful hour with Bill Owen, staff announcer at ABC. I have in front of me, folks, some precious delicacies.
Handle with care.
Handle with care. So attention, everybody at KVI and KEX and KMPC, because I have an official Gene Autry Club badge. You have two of these badges.
Isn't that something? You've got
Little Orphan Annie and Annie pin.
I must tell you, Larry, about my brother, he was the big fan. My shows were Dick Tracy and some of the others, Tom Mix, but his show was Little Orphan Annie, which was one of the early children's serials. And, getting a dime from your father back in the Depression days was not really that easy. And he had to send in, Pierre Andre, the announcer, would come on every day and say, send in part of an Ovaltine label and 10 cents, and we'll send you the decoder so you can decode these messages that we're sending out to try to break up these spies, that are chasing Little Orphan Annie all around the globe. So he finally got the dime, and he got the Ovaltine label, sent it in, waited his 6 or 8 weeks. It finally came, and he was really jumping up and down. He's about 7 years old. He was so excited, understandably. And that day he tuned in because for the first time, he'd be able to break the code. Pierre Andre would say 26, 14, L12 or something like that. Sounded like a bingo game. And that day, Pierre said, boys and girls, I've got some very bad news today. It's bad. He said, some spies have broken our code. So you're going to have to ask your parents for another dime and another Ovaltine label because we don't want the spies.
Oh, they were shifty. Hasn't much changed since then.
Not a whole lot.
Did you have a Captain Midnight decoder ring?
I didn't get that. I think you're one ahead of me there.
Oh, I love that.
But you didn't say.
Did you have a Mandrake the Magician? Will you remember the Mandrake the Magician?
I used to listen to, I think all that I have is in that little box there. I've got a Dick Tracy. I think I was, a sergeant in his patrol.
Yeah, you were a sergeant.
Yeah.
You got a Superman, Strength, Courage, Justice Club. Superman of America.
Right. We touched on the dual roles, and I call them the quadruple and septuple roles a while ago. Howard Duff told a marvelous story one time about being on a radio broadcast where these actors, they would really get into their part, and it was necessary. For example, if a man was playing a taxi driver, he couldn't just sit there and suddenly pretend he was a New York taxi driver. He would actually turn around away from the mic like this and talk over his shoulder like that, like, a voice would sound to you in the backseat of a car. It made it very realistic. Anyway, Howard was at the mic, and a girl had 2 roles, and they finished their scene, and then she's supposed to come back on the next page and do another role. She was late. She missed the cue. He had to ad-lib. You know why? She was going through a costume change. On radio.
Did you ever go watch those shows being done?
Oh, did I? I went to USC, as I mentioned, and that was my avocation. I spent more time than I should have. I'd go up to Sunset and Vine, where NBC and CBS was in Gower, a block away, and then Mutual was then down on Side Street, and ABC was a couple of blocks away. They were all in that immediate Sunset and Vine area is the point. And I would stand in line for hours to get tickets to go see all the shows that were coming from there, whether it was Fibber McGee and Molly or Abbott and Costello.
And you'd watch them stand around and read scripts. Right?
That's exactly
and the sound effects man would be in full view. He'd run up little stairs for people running upstairs.
And there was nothing more exciting in all the world than to watch Blondie in person. I'm sitting in the audience of 200 people to see this show that I've heard since childhood.
Okay, now another question. We have answered the fact that radio was theater of the mind, and you have written the definitive book on all of them. Why were we more excited seeing a radio show than we are now seeing a television show? I watched kids go see television shows, and they're excited, but not that excited.
They're really not.
We went crazy.
Yeah. I think that there was an intimacy that radio still has, that there's this feeling that this is for you. And, you know, I lived in a rather remote part of the United States, and I had to discover these programs, and I would sometimes pick up a station 200-300 miles away. And if I found a show, I think there was one called Mickey of the Circus I used to listen to in the afternoons, I felt that this show was written for me, that I was the only one in the world. I knew better, deep down, of course, but there was this feeling that is something that I have come across. And television always has been, and I think always will be, an art for the masses, and you never have that warm feeling that it's just for you.
So even when you went to see the show done, it was exciting because they were like in on a secret.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't ruin the illusion at all. I would still get excited today. I wish if they brought back Jack Armstrong, I'd be right there every afternoon listening to it.
Now, there used to be, I remember the afternoon you'd come home and there'd be a series of 15-minute shows.
That's correct.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Late soap opera.
Total
Lorenzo
program.
Jones and his wife, Belle.
Program content about 4.5 minutes. Actually, by the time you got through the commercial, the opening, closing, sometimes the commercials would go on interminably.
And they would have the same sponsors forever. You always associated with sponsors.
That's another strength, Larry, of old radio, I think, that you don't have today. Well, corporations can't afford sponsorship today of television or even of radio shows. It's all participating, individual spots. And it was nothing to have a sponsor latch onto a show and stay with it for 15, 20, 25 years. To this day, when you think of Ma Perkins, you think of Oxydol. When you think of Little Orphan Annie, you think of Ovaltine, and Jack Armstrong, we all know as Wheaties. What a marvelous way for a sponsor to go.
Tom Mix and Hotshot Ralston.
Absolutely.
Remember that? Have you tried Wheaties?
Never forget it. There's so many funny things that happened during that era, too. Hanley Stafford was on a show called John's Other Wife, one of the great afternoon soap operas. Yeah. He was fired from the show because they said he could not project a fatherly image. That's what they were looking for, that particular role. He was fired from that show, and he was hired by Maxwell House to play Baby Snooks' father, probably the most famous father role in the history of radio. But he projected the image pretty well for them.
We'll be right back with Bill Owen of ABC. The books you wrote were what? Titled what? They're still available in libraries and stores?
In libraries. They're out of print right now. Radio's golden age was the forerunner. It became the big broadcast, 1920 to 1950.
We'll be right back with Bill Owen following these messages.
Hey, Mom and Pop, babysitters too. Here's life-saving advice for you. North or west or east or south, kids like to put things in their mouth. Buttons and bows, pins and bacon, anything that's trouble-making, things that stick or stab or scrape and leave kids breathing in bad shape. So that is why this song is sung, to help protect the infant lung.
Infants should not be left alone. Their play area should be clear of any little toy or object they can put in their mouth. Guard against peanuts, hard beans, or hard candy. They can be aspired and stick in the throat or even be trapped in the lungs. The best protection for young lungs is the care you take to keep all swallow-type objects out of their way.
For more information about lung protection, write to your local lung association. They bring this message as a public service because they care about every breath you take.
If your business relies on print advertising, here are some cold facts. Since 1967, average daily newspaper circulation has not matched population growth. Yet, average cost per thousand has more than doubled. Since 1967, radio's audience is up 66%. Every day, radio reaches more adults than newspapers, TV, or magazines. Radio. It's red hot. Get more facts. Call this station or the Radio Advertising Bureau. They brought you this message.
82 is for you at Weber Toyota in Lawndale. Right now, a new 82 Toyota half-ton pickup number 027154, just $82 over factory invoice. Weber wants to be the #1 truck dealer. For this 82 Toyota truck special, see Weber Toyota, Redondo Beach Boulevard at Hawthorne Boulevard in lovely little Lawndale.
KNBC, Los Angeles.
It's the Larry King Show, live from the studios of WOR in New York City.
We're with Bill Owen on this nostalgia trip, the 60th anniversary of this great radio station, which was one of the founding stations of the Mutual Broadcasting System, along with then WGN in Chicago and WXYZ in Detroit. They have all kind of gone separate ways now, but their memory lingers for all of us, and Bill Owen has made kind of a study of it. That book that you have there, which is exhaustive, you have listed every program. Who was the talent on the show? Also how many different people, for example, played, let me see, let's pick one, right, the Lone Ranger.
Oh, there are a good half dozen. I'd have to turn to it precisely, but there were a number. But of course, the most famous one came along later, Brace Beamer, and he played it for many, many years. And it's very interesting. You may have heard the story of how he took over from Earl Grosser, who was killed in an automobile accident. Earl had been associated with the role for several years in the 30s. So they had to bring the audience in gradually because it would be a shock to them, to their believability, to suddenly have a different voice. And Brace had a much deeper voice than Grosser. So in the script, they rewrote the script following Grosser's death, and the Ranger was badly wounded. And Tonto carried the show for several weeks. And then gradually you'd hear a little response as he came out of his coma. And maybe a sentence at the end of 6 weeks. And finally, by then the audience was conditioned and they accepted Brace Beamer.
And we investigated what kind of money these people made. What did a Brace Beamer make for playing the Lone Ranger?
Well, some of the money was good and some wasn't. Now, that was a show that came out of Detroit, and it was originally local based. I don't know what his exact salary was, but I would guess that he was in the lower bracket, and yet some of the people in New York that would go from show to show. See, it depended mostly on how many different shows you did, rather than starring in one show.
A lot of people did a lot of shows, right?
Oh, they used to literally run from place to place, out of breath, and get to the studio. People like Bud Collyer, he did maybe a dozen roles a day. They were all over. Announcers did the same.
Different networks?
Oh, yes. There was no problem of a crossover unless they were bound.
Contractual people?
There were some that were contracted. Usually they would hire glamorous women to be an NBC starlet, just as the studios had their system.
Villains. Now, there were some voices that were always familiar to me.
Well, first of all,
the villain on The Lone Ranger was always a guy who's, I think he may still be around.
Well, Mandel Kramer played
Kramer.
He played most of the villains in the New York originated shows, and I remember him saying, he was telling me when I was talking to him doing this book, that he was so surprised 20 years after he had done his last big broadcast. He got into a taxi cab, and the cabbie said, "Hey, you're the villain on radio." And he said, I can't believe that they would recognize it. But he had a trademark, that voice. It was so sinister. But, another way, besides the voice, that you could usually tell a villain, this was, I didn't know the word wasp in those days, but it was a waspish medium, in a sense. And if the name of the actor was Joe, Bill, Bob, Jack, maybe Larry, you knew he was a good, clean-cut type. But if his name had any bit of a foreign ring to it, if it was Basil, you knew he had to be a bad guy. If it was Lola had to be a seductress. She couldn't be a nice person or school teacher. And then if it was Mike or Eddie, something like that, well, they were good people, but kind of rough, tough guys. It was very, very well characterized.
Now, break it down for me, the cities these shows originated in. Was New York the hub?
Not always.
Because Chicago did shows.
It depended. The correct answer to that question is it depended on what type of show you're referring to. If you're referring to the soap operas, And the children's serials, we're talking mostly Chicago. If you're talking about the primetime entertainment with the big orchestra, the singers, and so on, then we're talking originally New York and later Hollywood. Hollywood eventually got about 90% of it in the 40s. They all moved out there, Eddie Cantor, Jack Benny, but originally they were New York-based. But the shows that you remember classified as the soaps and the children, some children's shows came out of this very studio.
Chicago.
Definitely, yeah. And Detroit had a small share. They had the Trendle shows, Sergeant Preston, and Fred Foy was the announcer on both The Lone Ranger and Preston. He tells my favorite story, and I want to make sure he gets credit because I love this story so much. They did live shows. They didn't know what tape was, of course, in those days. And they were doing a broadcast, and he was the narrator, and he had to come in every other page or so and describe what's going on. He was setting the scene one time for an old-timer out in the Klondike somewhere, and he had been tied down somehow by these bad people and left out there for the wolves to devour. Well, he sets the scene very well, and early on he tells how this fella had taken a wolf that was ill and nursed him back to health. Okay, now the scene goes on. It's a few years later, and he's gone through this terrible situation, and the pack of wolves is approaching. And the line calls for him to look up and see the leader of the pack who's about to jump on him. He's supposed to say, that look, that snarl, those eyes, that hair, that's my wolf. Well, you can see it's a beautiful story. Except he tripped over the line. And he looked up and he said, that snarl, that hair, those eyes, that's my wife. And he tried to catch himself. And then poor Fred had to come in at that point, and he said he stuck a pencil in his hand to give himself some pain so he wouldn't break up.
There was a lot of breaking up.
Oh, constantly.
The sound effects men, they were specialists, were they not?
Oh, there was an art unto itself. And, of course, they had to think very fast, as the classic case at CBS, when one of the soundmen one time was supposed to fire off a gun, and either the gun jammed or he was being inattentive. And the line, I think it was Jackson Beck was delivering a line saying, okay, I'm going to shoot you. Take that. Nothing happened. He said, okay, my gun jammed. Now it's ready. Take that. Still nothing happened. He said, so my gun is going to jam on me. Okay, I'll stab you. With that, the sound man finally got going. And he says, here, I'm going to stab you now. Bang! Off went the gun.
Our guest is Bill Owen. We'll be back with our remaining moments on our trip down Nostalgia Lane this week here in New York following this message.
It's basically a professional computer.
It's basically a personal computer.
The Apple II is the personal computer powerful enough to be found in thousands of businesses nationwide. To me, this suggests the Apple II qualifies as a professional computer as well.
See, Dick Cavett says it's a professional computer.
But that's a personal observation.
It's professional.
No.
Yet, Apple II's ability to help manage schoolwork, career work, as well as provide diversions such as Invaders and other games, makes it ideal for family use.
Family use. That's personal.
No, it isn't.
Isn't.
To resolve this question, the people in the personal camp at Apple came up with an idea.
We packaged the Apple II with programs and accessories.
Yeah.
We'll lower the price and call it the Apple Family System.
Everything you need to get into personal computing in a professional way.
Hear that? He said professional.
No, it's professional.
Pay a visit to your professional and very personal Apple dealer.
Thank you.
There's never been a better time.
Get a free demonstration of the Apple Family System now at Computer Stop at 16811 Hawthorne Boulevard in Lawndale. Visit Computer Stop in Lawndale today.
It's the Larry King Show, live from the studios of WOR in New York City.
Our guest is Bill Owen. He is the staff announcer at ABC, a radio nostalgia buff who's printed and put together some of the great books on radio. We have something here. What is it do we have? Do we have a commercial we can play? One of the... No? What is it? Can you tell me? Oh, with the Hotshot Ralston thing, which we heard. Now, this was a very famous, right? How long did they sponsor this show?
Oh, they had probably about a 15-year run with it.
Why was there so much... Yeah, we heard that one. Why was there so much sponsor... Why do sponsors stay longer in radio than they do in television?
Well, two reasons. They had the great sponsor identification, which we touched on before, and they could afford to do it in those days. They were not talking about the $1 million contracts. So it just simply made sense. Incidentally, Tom Mix never did appear on the show in the title role. They were always actors portraying him. The audience,
You're kidding.
The audience always thought it was Tom Mix. The names are Artels Dixon, Russell Thorson, Jack Holden, and a great cowboy himself named Curly Bradley, but never Tom.
Why not?
He was probably too busy making movies out west. This happened a lot.
You mean the Tom Mix radio show I heard was not Tom Mix?
You feel defrauded?
I'm depressed.
Warden Laws did not appear on Warden Laws 20,000 Years in Sing Sing. They had voices. As a matter of fact, many times people who sang on radio and then would be called to the microphone for a quick exchange had actors portraying them at the microphone in the speaking parts because the producer thought, well, they can sing well, but they don't sound right when they're talking.
How big a hit was Gangbusters?
Certainly one of the biggest of all. It gave rise to an expression that we still use today. People that have never even heard of the radio show still use the expression coming on like gangbusters, which of course refers to that tremendous opening, the marching feet, the wailing sirens, the tremendous noise that went on.
The FBI and Peace and War.
That was...
Lava.
Yeah, that had good sponsor identification, but it was a long way behind Gangbusters, in terms of the ratings. The highest rated shows would be Walter Winchell had consistently the highest ratings of all. And I think he may have broadcast from this building for quite some time. Bill Stern's Colgate Sports Newsreel.
With his lie story.
Yeah, they were marvelous. They were great exaggerations, but so listenable. And, of course, the most popular situation comedies of all were Amos and Andy and Fibber McGee. Amos and Andy, you may have heard the tale that it was so popular in the 30s that movies could not compete with it. And so what they did, they would put on the marquee words to the effect that we don't have the movie while Amos and Andy's on, and we pipe it into the theater because they didn't want people to miss that. They wouldn't go to the movies if Amos and Andy was on.
It was that tremendous a show.
It just had the nation totally captivated.
And then we had, of course, Inner Sanctum, Suspense.
Inner Sanctum tried to make it on television. It was so successful on radio, on television, it was regarded as a comedy because, again, theater of the imagination.
And seeing the door open.
Exactly.
By the way, the narrator on Inner Sanctum was always funny.
Yeah, deliberately so.
Deliberately.
Yeah. Raymond Edward
tongue-in-cheek.
Johnson. Yeah.
Raymond Edward Johnson.
Yes, one of the great men of radio.
He always had funny things to say. No matter how scary the program was, he was always...
Yeah, he was spoofing it, but the show itself, as you well recall, would often leave chills. I was not allowed to hear probably the scariest of all because it came on at midnight, but it wasn't the time element as much as the fact that I used to get bad dreams and my parents thought it would affect me. It was Lights Out, which
Arch Obler.
Well, Arch Obler is associated with the show, but he did not create it. A fellow named Willis Cooper created it, set it up, and then Arch Obler came along, and he certainly added to the show, but he was not the creator.
Who was the voice that said, "Turn your lights out"? Boy, that was a voice.
I'd have to look and see who's.
Would you have liked? Now you're a staff announcer.
Yeah.
Would you have liked to have done some of those?
Oh, I feel that I just came along. I would gladly be 15 years older if I could file those memories in the back of my mind. I just missed it.
What intro would you have loved to announce?
That's a good question, and one I've never thought of before. I guess, since I'm the world's greatest Dick Tracy buff, I would love to have done that. And yet it had a very simple opening. It was simply,
what was it? I don't remember.
It was simply, I think, something like a telegraph key, and then you'd hear the radio going, and then Dick Tracy. Very simple. And
How about Grand Central Station?
Oh, there's one of the classic openings. And of course, there was a bit of a myth involved there. Nobody seemed to pay attention to the fact that Grand Central Station operated only electric trains then. And they always had the sound of the steam coming out as the announcer went through.
I never noticed that.
You know, I've got to, you said, which one would I like to have done? And I think maybe you've touched on one. if you're talking about a primetime show, let me just read the opening to that one. That
do it, yeah.
That was done by Tom Shirley and I think Jim Amici, among others. But
Jim had a voice just like Don. Jim and Don Amici had identical voices as brothers.
Don had a part on Jack Armstrong in which Jim played the title role, but they had to take Don off because...
They sounded too much alike.
Yeah. Okay, first you hear the train effects, up, full, and under, according to the script. Then the announcer says, as a bullet seeks its target, shining rails in every part of our great country are aimed at Grand Central Station, heart of the nation's greatest city. Drawn by the magnetic force of the fantastic metropolis, day and night great trains rush toward the Hudson River, sweep down its eastern bank for 140 miles, flash briefly by the long red row of tenement houses south of 125th Street, dive with a roar into the 2.5-mile tunnel which burrows beneath the glitter and swank of Park Avenue. And then you hear the escaping steam. Grand Central Station, crossroads of 1 million private lives, gigantic stage on which are played 1,000 dramas daily. Glitter and swank. What a great phrase.
That was a great opening. Wouldn't you have liked to set a tale well calculated to keep you in suspense?
Hey, you say that very well yourself.
That drove me crazy, that one line.
And let me quiz you. Let's see how many of these catchphrases you remember. Who said, what a revolting development this is?
Riley Bendix.
That's right. Yeah. And I'll mow you down, so help me.
Don't know.
That was Charlie McCarthy to Edgar, which was kind of, when you think about it, that was kind of a strange situation. One of the most highly rated programs was a ventriloquist. He didn't have to throw his voice. It could have been anybody sitting there.
And Jackie Gleason did television's Life for Riley.
That's right.
He was the
original. Bendix was not the original on radio. Lionel Stander, who you see on Heart to Heart, was the original.
Yeah. Bill, thank you for a great hour.
This has been fun.
Bill Owen of ABC. He's staff announcer. He wrote the definitive work on this, and our subject has been yesterday. We are going to pause for news on the hour, a word from your local stations. We'll come back with Open Phone America. We'll also continue with some nostalgia for you. You're going to hear a wonderful part of the first day this station went on the air, the day Pearl Harbor was bombed, and our own little musical tribute later on to this city. And you'll be hearing nostalgia throughout the week, culled from the archives of WOR. Our guests earlier tonight were Rick Devlin, the Vice President and General Manager of WOR, Carl Bernstein, co-author of All the President's Men in the Final Days, and now a Special Projects Development Reporter at ABC. And then for the past hour, the wonderful Bill Owen of ABC, a voice you hear every day on radio and television. Tomorrow night, Sonny Werblin, the president of Madison Square Garden, and another all-time radio great, Kenny Delmar. This is the Larry King Show in New York. And this is the Mutual Broadcasting System, your network for news and sports.
Do you know how many books written today have titles that start with the words how to?
Sure. How to lose weight, how to make a fortune, win new friends, and on and on.
Well, how about one that tells how to safeguard your children's eyesight through early and regular examinations?
How to protect your family's eyes against injury in sports, at work, in school, and at home through the use of protective eyewear.
How to guard against glaucoma through more frequent eye exams after age 35.
And how cataracts can be successfully corrected by surgery.
The National Society to Prevent Blindness says that knowledge of how to guard against blindness is something every family should be informed about. Because after all, half of all blindness can be prevented.
How to find out more about the preventable side of blindness. Write Prevent Blindness, 79 Madison Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. They wrote the book.
That's Prevent Blindness, 79 Madison Avenue, New York, New York, 10016.
KFBC Los Angeles.
Mutual news. The stock market opened the week on a sour note. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 13 points Monday to close at a 21-month low.